I finally get around to making the next tutorial video, and then this happens. And now I am paralyzed. Aren't I, buddy? Yeah. I'm not getting any work done. Hello and welcome. This is my third, part 3 of the turret tutorial, where we will learn how to shoot projectiles. So they'll be very basic projectiles, but they will serve the purpose. They will be able to shoot their target, deal damage, and blow them up. And the turret will still be able to follow them, and if you're quick enough, you can make it miss. And yeah. So let's get started, shall we? So I'm just going to switch over to my work in progress. Now the first thing that happened when I loaded this up, for some reason my turret got a blueprint error. So I loaded it up and I got this, fail building connection, yada 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 yada. And what that was located in this for each loop where our event begin play starts. So what I needed to do here is, for some reason it doesn't like taking the class filter and going straight into an array. I guess Epic must have updated it and changed the way it works, I'm not sure. But all I had to do was drag out from the for each loop, cast to the multi-tutorial target parent that we've been using since the last tutorial, and then drag that into the targets in range. And then we click compile, and that fixes that error. Now, one thing I did notice sometimes is the turret, when you start the game, won't immediately scan for these. If there's a slight delay in the game loading, it doesn't like it. So what I did was I added a delay of literally 1 frame, and that just made it so it was reliably getting all overlapping targets. Cool. Off to a good start. So first thing we need to do before we create a new projectile is we need to make the collision for it. So we'll go to the project settings and we'll go to the collision under engine, collision, new object channel, and we'll just call this projectile. And what we'll do is we'll set it just like the other ones to ignore initially, so we can close down the project settings, and we'll just go save all. So first thing we shall do is just we'll set up the targets. So we'll go into the multi-tutorial target parent, the parent that controls the 3 children, as we set it up in the previous video. So we select the sphere, and we go down to our collision presets, and we just turn projectile to overlap. And preemptively, I'll set this up with its health. So we go create a new variable, and we'll just call it health. And we'll set it as a float. So we'll set it to 3 for now. We can delete all of these. What we want is to event any damage. And then we can drag out the health, get the health. So what the event any damage is, it can go it goes with assign damage, apply damage. It goes with the apply damage node. So the applied damage will be in the projectile when we make it, and that's where we set the base damage and so on and so forth. This is the receiving end. So what we do is we get the health, we take a float, minus the damage out of it, and then we reset the health. Then what we do is we get the health again, we check if it is less than or equal to 0. Create a branch by pressing B and clicking. And then if its health is less than 0, we do once and then destroy actor. The reason why we do once is just a bit of a like a redundancy check for me, because if this receives damage and its health goes below 0, it will go to destroy the actor, but if it gets hit by multiple projectiles at the same time, it will throw errors because it'll trigger this multiple times and then try and destroy itself multiple times. So the do once makes it so that it will destroy itself just the once when it hits 0 health, and any further triggers will not try and make it run, which it's just it stops errors throwing out and stops it trying to destroy something that doesn't exist. So we'll just comment that as receive damage, if that's how you spell receive. Is it E-I? I before E except after C. Alright, so that should be right. Okay, so that's set up. Next thing we need to do is actually create, well, we'll go File and Save All. What we need to do is create the projectile. So we'll go right click, blueprint class, and actor. And we'll just I'll call this projectile underscore parent. Now, just like the targets, how we have one parent that has all of the things, the health and the logic, and everything after it, you can change the individual health, and you can change how they react to damage types and all of that. The projectile parent will be the same. We'll have one, by the end of this video, we'll have one basic little kind of like cone bullet, but then we can make other shapes that deal different amounts of damage, and they work differently. Some can be a mortar, some can be bullets, arrows, so on and so forth. So we'll just start with basic, and we'll open up the projectile. Now, what we want to do is, I like to keep the default scene root and add a static mesh. The static mesh, I previously just put it as a cone, and what I did was I rotated it 90 degrees so that it went along the positive X. So when it fires, it will be going that way. And then I'll turn off this. I'll just scale it down and make it into something like a bullet or something, and then I will move it there. So there we go. So there's my little bullet. What we can do is, with collision, we can either add a capsule, something like a capsule, capsule collision to it, and have the collision work off of that if you wanted, something like that. I'm going to turn down my camera speed. But for the sake of this, what I'll do is I'll use the static mesh itself. So we click on the static mesh, go to details, and under the collision presets, we can change it to a custom. Under collision enabled, we only need query, we do not need physics. Under the object type, we set it to that new projectile. We can ignore everything on the collision responses except for target, which we overlap. And then we compile and save. And that is our projectiles mesh. Next thing we need to do is, in the add component, we need to add a projectile movement component. So by default, I'll just set it at 2500. I had it at 1200 in the preview at the beginning of the video. 2500 is a bit fast, well, much faster, double the speed. What we want is the rotation follows velocity. So it means that no matter what angle we shoot this thing at, it will always actually face the direction that we fire it, rather than like firing out sideways, etc., etc. What we want to do is turn off the projectile gravity scale. That way it will just fly straight at the target and not fall to the ground. Because we don't have gravity, we can skip the bouncing and the simulation, and the homing projectile we can do later. One thing I want to mention is just the velocity. The velocity is currently set to x of 1, y, and z of 0. What that means is when it gets fired, it will go the movement speed of 2500 in that direction, x of 1. So if we made that y of 1 instead of x of 1, it would shoot off that way. But we do not want that. So that's all we need for setting up the mesh and the components. Next thing we want to do is actually set up the projectile itself. So we'll get rid of the default overlap, and in the event begin play, we will need to create a new variable for our begin play, start location. Need to make that a vector, and projectile range, make that a float. So what this will do, what we're doing now, is setting it up so that when we fire the projectile, if it misses, if it doesn't hit something, it will self-destruct after a distance. I learned the hard way when I was first learning UE4 when it came out, that you need to self-destruct the projectiles, otherwise they'll just keep going and then the game will have a million projectiles in the background and you don't understand why your FPS is at 3. So what we'll do is we'll go start location, set it, and get actor location. So we start off by setting that. So as soon as we spawn the projectile, we get its location. Then what we do is through the tick, we get the start location, and we'll just copy and paste the actor location node, and then we get start location minus a vector. You can do it either way. You can do actor location minus start location or start location minus actor location. Either way, all you need is the vector length, and then we need to check if it is greater than or equal to the projectile range, and I'll just set the projectile range to 2000. Okay, so we'll go branch by B and then click, drag in. If it is greater than that, do once destroy actor. Once again, doing, whoops, not destroy tracker. Once again, only doing once, because since we are doing it on the tick, if once it's over, it will try and tick and destroy itself 30, 60, 120 times each frame before it actually properly deletes itself and does the collect garbage thing that it does. And it'll just throw out errors because once again it'll be trying to destroy something that doesn't exist. So that's the distance. What we want to do is now set up the overlap. So we'll right click on the static mesh, add event, on component begin overlap. What we want to do from there is cast from the other actor to our target parent. Then if the casting is successful, we want to apply damage. And we want to apply a base damage of just 1. Actually, what we'll do is we'll add a variable and call it damage. And if we make it instant editable, that means we can change projectile damage in the future for the other, like for the children. So we'll go damage 1. We'll just set the damage causer as self. That way you know which projectile, like you can later on down the track, like track that the projectile came from a certain weapon, so you know which weapon destroyed it, so that you can apply experience to that weapon or whatever. It's just good to know who's caused the damage. One thing we do want to do in here is apply a do once again, because it counts overlaps per frame, so it'll be like the second it'll hit, it'll deal 1 damage 30 times, because that's just the way the game works. So we'll go do once, and then we will destroy the actor. So once it overlaps one of the targets, we only want to do once, apply the 1 damage, and then destroy this projectile. So compile and save. We can close down the projectile, we can close down the target. Now here comes the fun part. We can move the begin play node out of the way. And we don't need the reset aim. The only thing we're going to be working with is the aim at target, and we will be creating a new fire at target. So what we want to do is we want to create 3 at the moment 3 custom events. So we want start firing, we want stop firing, and we want continue. Oops. Custom event continue firing. Then what we want to do is we want to add a couple variables. So one is refire delay, which is a float, and that allows us to pick how fast, we'll set it as instance editable as well, and we'll pick how fast we want the weapon to fire. So once every 2 seconds will do. Then we want to create another variable, can shoot. And what this will do, I set it as a boolean, and what this will allow us to do is determine whether the turret should fire while it's turning and aiming. So if it's turning to a target, we can set it up so that it won't fire until it's actually aiming at the target. That way you won't have it firing willy-nilly all over the place. So let's get started. First thing I want to do is create a timeline. So add timeline, I will call it turret refire. Now what a timeline does is, if you do play, well actually first if you double click on it, it gives you the option to add a float track, a vector track, an event track, a color track. By default its length is 5, which means 5 seconds because it does it in time. So it goes, as it plays, it just goes 0 to 5 in float. So this is 0.01 all the way up to, per every frame, all the way up to 5. Play from start, every time, or if you hit play, if you put into the input multiple times, it will just continue from where it is. If you do play from start, every time the execution comes in, it sets itself back to 0 and starts again. Stop just stops the whole thing. Reverse will reverse it from where it is. So if it's at 2, it'll reverse back to 0. If you reverse from end, it shoots to 5 and then reverses back. And the set new time, you can update whenever you want. So it could be playing, could get to 1, and you could have something saying, if this gets to 1, immediately set it to 3. And that's what that will do. The set new time will set it to what you want it to. But what we'll be using it for is to determine whether the turret is essentially in cooldown and whether it can refire or not. So what we want to do is go to our components, drag out the turret refire timeline, and get. We can also get that by going get turret refire, and it will show up there. Or whatever you name the timeline, of course. What we want to do is set timeline length and set that as the refire delay. So whatever the refire delay is, so it's at 2. When we start firing, it will set that to the refire. So if we dynamically change the refire, like we upgrade the turret and it changes the refire delay, when we start firing, it will make sure that it resets it in the changes it in the turret refire timeline. Cool. So next thing we want to do is get. I'll drag this down here. My organization is terrible. I apologize. We want to drag out from the turret refire and get play back position. So this will get the current position of this. So if this is halfway through playing at 2.5, or well, it's a refire delay of 2. So if it's halfway through playing at 1, this will read back as 1. So we want to drag out equals, get a branch, and we want to keep it at 0. So if the playback is at 0, which means it is not playing, then we want to play. And then when it's actually, what we want to do is, yeah, we'll leave it at that. We want to create a new custom, new custom event and call it reset fire timeline. The reset fire timeline, we will run a sequence and then we'll go stop and set new time of 0. So what this will do is when we want to reset this, so once the weapon's cooled down, what it'll do is it'll stop the timeline and then set it to 0, because if we only set it to 0, it would still continue to play. We need to stop it first. So what we do is we call the reset fire timeline when it is finished. So reset fire timeline. So quick run through, start firing. Set the timeline to the delay of 2. Is the timeline currently playing? No. So then, what is the timeline stopped? Yes, it is stopped at 0. We play. Play for the 2 seconds, which is the delay. When it is finished, we reset. When we reset, we stop it and set it back to 0. So then what we do is after that, after it is reset, we call the continue firing. So it resets back to 0, has the 2-second delay, then we go to continue firing. So when we need to do continue firing, all we need to do is check, can it still shoot? Can shoot. If it can shoot, we check to see if the timeline is at 0. If it is, continue firing. So that, when run, providing that the can shoot is true, that will continue running through. We will add the actual fire projectile in a second. Actually, that's what we'll do now. I'll create a custom event. Fire projectile. So what we want to do is get current target, get current target, create a branch, not a branch, is valid. So when we go to fire the projectile, we check if the current target is valid. If it is valid, spawn actor from class. If it is not valid, we will stop firing, which is here. We haven't set it up yet. So what we want to do is get the cannon mesh, get world transform. We want to make transform from the actor and break transform. So we want the location and the rotation. We do not want the scale because we want to be able to change the scale of this if we ever need to. For the class, we will set up the projectile. And that is all we need to do for the fire projectile. So we go back to where we've set up our timeline, and just in here, so after we check to make sure that the timeline is on 0, we fire our projectile like that. And once we've done that, that is everything we need to do. So we start firing, we set the timeline to 2, check to see if the timeline is at 0. If it's at 0, fire the projectile, go into cooldown. Once you've gone into cooldown, reset this back to 0, and then continue firing. Okay. Now before we set up to stop firing, I'll just set this up to fire at target. Cool. Before we set up the stop firing, we need to change our aim at target a little bit. So the first thing we need to do is check where it's checks to see if the current target is valid, and if it is not valid, we need to stop firing. So just quickly add that one in there. Next thing we need to do is over here where we get the actor transform and do the inverse transform direction, we need to turn this make rotator from X into a variable. And we can set that variable after our target location and before we set the relative rotations of the platform mesh and the cannon mesh. What I will call that is just target aim rotator, without capitals being turned on. So what this is essentially the rotation that is looking at the target. And what we want to do is then later check to make sure that the platform and the cannon are facing the right direction before we fire. That will make more sense in just a second. I have to drag this out and drag this out. Drag it out a lot. So after the set relative rotation, what we want to do is we get the cannon mesh and we get the platform mesh. And then for both of them, we get relative rotation. Excuse the sniffles and the coughing and funny noises. So once we've done that, we break rotator for both of them. And then we get the pitch, so the Y of the cannon mesh, and make a rotator. So we Y into Y, and then we get the Z, the yaw of the platform, into that. And we can keep the roller 0. Because the turret will never rotate on the X, on its X on the roll. So we don't have to worry about it. It can just be sitting at 0. Now, once we've done all that, we get our target aim rotator. And what we want to do is check if the target aim rotator is equal to this new rotator that we've made out of the cannon mesh's pitch. And and the platform meshes yaw. The reason why we're doing this is the cannon mesh we've set up to only pivot up and down. It's the platform itself that rotates to aim at the target. So we need the platform mesh's rotation on its Z, and we need the cannon's pivot on its Y, on its pitch. I'll just so we've got the equal now. For the float tolerance, I'll just set it to 1, and we set a branch. So drag out into the branch. So drag from the set relative rotation into the branch. I might just straighten that. And drag into there, like that. Then, what we want to do is create a new custom event and call it reset fire trigger. So out of this branch, if it is our aiming rotators are all equal, which means that the turret is looking directly or close enough to the target, we then want to draw out a sequence. And from this sequence, we drag out a do once, and we drag the reset fire trigger into the reset of the do once. We drag out and set can shoot, and then we drag out and start firing, and that is what will trigger the projectile being fired. From the second part of the sequence, we want to drag out and continue the delay and the continue aim that we had before. In the false of the branch, so if it is not looking close enough at the target, we want to drag out and stop firing, and then we copy and paste the delay and the continue aim. So it will always, no matter whether it can shoot or it can't, we will always continue aiming at the target. So now we go to the stop firing, and we drag out can shoot, set that as off, and then we reset the fire trigger. So that way, what it means is no matter how many times this runs through, because it runs during on tick, so if frames per second is 30, it will run into this 30 times, but we only want to run the start firing once. It just makes it so that it's not trying to constantly fire when it already is. And that's why the sequence is there, so that what it'll do is it'll continue to aim. It'll run through, come up here, say, oh, I've already done this, then I will just continue aiming. So that, I believe, is everything. Quite possibly. I guess now we'll just test and make sure that everything is working. So let's go to the level, and my cat is coming up onto the desk. Hi buddy. So what we'll do is we'll click play, and then bang, there you can see the projectile firing, and with any luck it'll kill it. It'll kill it. And it will kill it. Then it'll stop firing and it resets. And hopefully when I stop, no errors. And if we start again and it starts firing and we move it out of range, it'll start to the next one, move it out of range, start to the next one. And I can go backwards and forwards, and it'll only fire once every 2 seconds. And if it's not able to see properly, if it's not able to see the, I don't even know where I sent that. Oh no, it died. If it's not able to see and aim properly, so if it can't look directly at it, it will stop firing, and then it will start firing once it's back in. So I hope that is good enough to help you guys out. I think next I might make the enemies maybe have a health bar, maybe like follow a pathway, not too sure yet. Feel free to make suggestions. The more suggestions you guys make, the more ideas I can have for my next video. So I hope that's helped everyone, that you'll be able to make projectiles now. Thank you very much, and see you next time.